In a desert of blood and vengeance, he vowed never to surrender, neither to the whites nor to love. But on that stormy night, when an unknown woman crossed the fires of the village with a sleeping baby against her chest and a secret in her eyes, the most feared warrior felt his own heart falter for the first time. She carried on her shoulders a past that could destroy his honor, and on her lips the promise of a forbidden desire. Between them, the tension was a sharp knife. Hatred, desire, and fear mixed like poison and honey. She shouldn't be there. He shouldn't touch her. A story of dark passion, fierce sensuality, and secrets capable of killing. Prepare to hold your breath, because not every heart survives a forbidden love. If intense and unexpected love stories like this touch your heart, subscribe to this channel and comment what you thought. Every day we post new plots that move and surprise. Discover now the romance that no one dared to live. The heat of the Texas plains seemed to burn to the bone when she appeared at the ranch gate, emerging from the red dust like an impossible mirage. A woman with black hair stuck to her forehead with sweat, sunburned tan skin, lips parted from thirst, carrying a child a few months in her arms, entered the Blackwood property with the silent dignity of one who doesn't beg, but carries a desperate plea in her dark eyes. Jackson Blackwood, the most feared and respected rancher in the entire region, felt his chest tighten when he saw her cross the packed dirt yard. He, who had never surrendered to anything or anyone, who commanded thousands of head of cattle and hundreds of cowboys with an iron fist, was caught completely unprepared by that presence that seemed to have come from his most intimate nightmares and, at the same time, from his most dangerous desires. She didn't say her name. She didn't need to. The way she looked at him, without lowering her head before his severe countenance, without showing the submission that everyone else showed in his presence, was enough to root in him a burning curiosity that wouldn't let him sleep for many nights. She carried secrets, and each of her secrets smelled of forbidden temptation. Sarah, that was the name she whispered only when asked by the lady of the house, was different from all the women who had passed through there. She wasn't a ranch hand looking for work, wasn't one of the daughters of neighboring ranchers trying to impress the most coveted bachelor in the region. She was something wilder, more dangerous. There was a contained strength in her that Jackson recognized in himself, a proud rebelliousness that intrigued and disturbed him at the same time. In the first few days, he tried to keep his distance, but the entire ranch noticed the crack in his armor. Whenever she walked across the yard, the gentle sway of her hips under the simple, worn dress made something in his blood throb. The way she lowered her eyes for a moment, only to raise them defiantly afterwards, consumed him. His hands trembled when touching her baby, as if each gesture were a betrayal of his own rules. And still, he couldn't avoid the desire to help her, to smell her scent of wet earth mixed with the warmth of her skin. Her story came gradually, in whispers among the employees of the main house. Sarah had been the mistress of a powerful federal congressman, a married and influential man who kept her in secret in an apartment in Austin. When she discovered she was pregnant, he pressured her to abort, but she refused. The politician then tried to use the child as a bargaining chip in shady negotiations, promising to give it up for adoption in exchange for political favors. Sarah fled in the dead of night, taking only the clothes on her back and the baby in her arms. It was at night, however, that the entire ranch fell silent, and the two remained awake under the same sky of infinite stars of the plains, exchanging long glances beside the embers of the fire in the yard. He heard her tell in whispers pieces of her story, how she had been raised in a slum in Austin, how she had struggled to study and work, how she had met the congressman when serving at a political event, how he had seduced her with promises of a better life, how she discovered she was just an object of pleasure for him, how she had sworn never to submit to anyone again. In these intimate dawns, Jackson discovered in her a flame similar to his own. He too had been raised in poverty, the son of a ranch hand who died in an accident with cattle. He had fought, studied, worked 16 hours a day until he managed to buy his first ranch. He had built an empire from nothing, but had never forgotten where he came from. Perhaps that was what attracted him so much to her. A raw sensuality, an inner strength that reminded him of himself, as if desire itself lived in every curve of that body that he couldn't stop imagining. The tension between them grew each day until the inevitable breaking of the dam. The first significant event came during a torrid afternoon in July, when he followed her silently to the creek where she washed clothes alone. There, he saw her remove her blouse, letting the cold water stick the thin fabric to her back, revealing every detail of the scars that hard life and the previous man had left her. For a moment, he felt paralyzed. But jealousy, desire, and fury mixed and pushed him toward her like an animal. She turned when she felt his presence but didn't back away when he held her by the shoulders. The kiss was devastating, not of tenderness, but of contained anger, of years of loneliness exploding all at once. He lifted her in his arms and laid her on the margin of damp sand, running over each scar with his mouth, as if he wanted to erase all the marks of the other man with his own skin. And she cried and smiled between muffled moans, surrendering to the savagery of that desire that had been growing for weeks. "You shouldn't be here," he murmured against her neck, his voice hoarse with desire and conflict. "You shouldn't have come to my ranch." "I had nowhere to go," she answered, her nails dug into his back, feeling every tense muscle under his sunburned skin. "I had nothing more to lose." "Now you do," he said, raising his face to look at her. "Now you have me." It was a promise and a threat at the same time. Jackson knew he was getting into something dangerous, that a woman like Sarah would bring complications to his carefully controlled life. But he couldn't resist the magnetic force she exerted over him, the way she challenged him with her eyes, as if she knew all his darkest secrets. The second event didn't take long. Hank, the oldest foreman on the ranch, spying from a distance, spread what he had seen, and the entire property fell on Jackson with murmurs and disapproving looks. "Boss getting involved with a stranger," they commented. "A politician's woman on top of it." Even Mrs. Martha, the housekeeper who had raised him after his parents' death, turned her back on him, ashamed. But Jackson didn't yield. With his fingers intertwined with hers, he proclaimed before all the employees gathered in the yard that Sarah and the child were his now, a promise as bold as a challenge to the gods. That same night she sought him in his room, with tears in her eyes and fire in her body. "Why did you do that?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why did you expose yourself that way?" "Because I can no longer live pretending that you don't exist," he answered, pulling her to him with an urgency that surprised her. "Because since you arrived here, nothing else makes sense. What they did there, in the timid moonlight that entered through the slats of the blinds, was less a carnal act than a silent pact. His hands took her as promised land. Her lips burned his skin like embers. There was no possible return. Jackson had chosen his side, and Sarah had found something she never thought she would have again, a man willing to fight for her. But peace lasted briefly. The next morning brought disturbing news. The congressman had discovered where she was. Through his network of informants and political influence, he had located the ranch and was on his way. He wasn't coming alone. He brought with him a court order to search and seize the child, claiming that Sarah was an unfit mother and that he had paternal rights. "He's going to try to take me by force," Sarah said, trembling in Jackson's arms. "He'll use the law, the police, everything at his disposal." "Not while I'm alive," Jackson answered, his voice laden with a dark promise. "No one is going to touch you or the child." It was a declaration of war. Jackson knew he was placing himself against a man with power and influence, someone who could destroy his life with a simple phone call. But something inside him had changed since Sarah arrived. He was no longer just the solitary rancher who had built his walls to protect himself from the world. He was a man in love, dangerous when provoked, willing to do anything to protect what was his. That night, she came to him once more. But this time there was something different in her eyes. A vulnerability that she had never shown before, a need that went beyond physical desire. "If something happens to me," she whispered, pressing her face against his chest, "take care of Ethan. Promise you'll take care of my son." "Nothing is going to happen to you," Jackson answered, lifting her chin so she would look him in the eyes. "I won't allow it." But even saying this, he knew that the storm was just beginning. The congressman had resources and power that Jackson didn't possess. The battle that approached would be unequal, and the risks were enormous. But for the first time in his life, Jackson Blackwood was willing to bet everything on a single hand. Love had come into his life like a hurricane, devastating and uncontrollable. and he was ready to face any storm to protect it. The congressman arrived on a July morning when the sun had barely risen, and dew covered the pasture like a silver veil. 3 black cars stopped at the ranch gate, raising a cloud of red dust that spread across the yard like a dark omen. Sarah felt the blood freeze in her veins when she saw that tall and imposing figure get out of the middle car, followed by 2 lawyers in suits and a woman she recognized as a social worker. William Harrison was 52 years old, with perfectly combed gray hair, elegant bearing, and that political smile that she knew so well. But behind the mask of civility, Sarah saw the contained fury, the wounded ego of a man who wasn't accustomed to having his desires contradicted. He came to fetch what he considered his by right, and he wouldn't accept no for an answer. Jackson appeared on the porch of the main house before the visitors even knocked at the door. He wore a simple white shirt, jeans, and leather boots, but his dominant presence was unmistakable. His tensed muscles, clenched jaw, eyes fixed on the congressman with an intensity that made Sarah tremble. She knew that look. It was the same one he used when a wild bull needed to be tamed. "Congressman Harrison," Jackson said, descending the porch steps with slow, measured steps. "I didn't know you had business on my property." "I do indeed, Mr. Blackwood," William responded, his tone formal but laden with authority. "I've come to fetch what is mine." "My wife and my son." "Your wife?" Jackson laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "From what I know, you've been married for 20 years to the senator's daughter. Sarah was never your wife, Congressman. She was just a pastime." William's face contorted with anger, but he controlled himself. He knew he was being observed by the ranch employees who had gathered in the yard to watch that confrontation. Any display of loss of control could be used against him later. "I didn't come here to discuss semantics," William said, signaling for one of the lawyers to approach. "I came to assert my rights. I have a court order to search and seize the child. Sarah is an unfit mother, without financial resources or family structure to raise a son." "Court order based on what?" Jackson asked, receiving the papers from the lawyer's hands. "On lies? On blackmail? On abuse of power?" "On facts," William responded coldly. "Sarah is a woman without a fixed residence, without employment, without family. She abandoned the apartment that I provided for her, taking my son without my authorization. That is kidnapping, Mr. Blackwood." Sarah, who until then had remained silent behind Jackson, took a step forward. The baby slept peacefully in her arms, oblivious to the storm forming around him. "Kidnapping?" she repeated, her voice trembling with indignation. "You locked me in that apartment like a prisoner, William. You forbade me from going out, from working, from having my own life. When I discovered that you planned to use my son as a bargaining chip to gain political support, I fled. Any mother would have done the same." "You have no proof of that," William retorted, but Sarah saw a flash of concern in his eyes. "They are just empty accusations from a desperate woman." "They are not," Jackson intervened, taking an envelope from his shirt pocket. "Sarah told me everything. Recordings, documents, photographs. Everything you did to her is duly recorded." It was a bluff, but William didn't know that. The congressman paled, quickly calculating the consequences if that information leaked. His political career, his marriage, his reputation, everything would crumble like a house of cards. "You're making a serious mistake, Blackwood," William said, his voice low and threatening. "You don't know who you're messing with. I can end your life, your business, everything you've built." "You can try," Jackson responded, approaching until he was face to face with the congressman. "But I'm not one of your political vassals, Congressman. I'm a free man, on my own land, protecting the woman and child I love. And if you try to take either of them by force, you'll discover what I'm capable of." The tension in the air was palpable. The ranch employees had approached, forming a protective semicircle behind Jackson. They all knew Sarah's story, all knew that she had found refuge there, and all were willing to defend her. William realized that he was at a numerical and territorial disadvantage. "This isn't over," the congressman said, signaling for his entourage to return to the cars. "I'll return with the necessary police force. The law is on my side." "The law, perhaps," Jackson responded, "but not justice." After the cars departed, leaving only the red dust as a memory of their presence, Sarah collapsed in Jackson's arms. All the accumulated tension came out in silent tears, while he held her tightly, murmuring words of comfort in her ear. "He'll come back," Sarah said, her voice muffled against his chest. "He won't give up. He has too much pride to accept a defeat." "Then we'll be ready," Jackson responded, stroking her hair. "But first, I need to know everything. Every detail, every name, every document. If we're going to fight against him, I need ammunition." That night, Sarah told everything. Sitting on the porch of the main house with the baby sleeping in her lap, she recounted the 2 years of relationship with William Harrison. How he had met her at a political event, how he had courted her with expensive gifts and promises of eternal love, how he had installed her in the apartment in Austin, how he had gradually become possessive and controlling. "He forbade me from going out alone," Sarah recounted, her eyes lost in the darkness of the plains. "He said it was for my protection, that a woman like me didn't know how to take care of herself in the big city. He controlled every penny I spent, every person I talked to. I was a doll in a showcase, Jackson. Pretty for him to look at, but without my own will." "And the pregnancy?" Jackson asked, his voice carefully controlled. "When I found out, I thought he would be happy," Sarah continued. "I thought we would finally have a real family, that he would acknowledge our relationship. But he was furious. He said I had done it on purpose to tie him down. He demanded that I abort. But you didn't want to." "I couldn't," Sarah admitted, instinctively pressing the baby against her chest. "I had already lost so much in life, Jackson. My mother died when I was a teenager. My father disappeared when I was a child. Ethan was the only family I had left. I couldn't kill him." Jackson felt a deaf rage grow in his chest. He knew men like William Harrison, men who thought that money and power gave them the right to control others' lives. He had faced some of them over the years, corrupt politicians who tried to take his lands, businessmen who wanted to buy his ranch for a pittance. But he had never faced someone as powerful as the congressman. "There's more," Sarah continued hesitantly. "I discovered by chance that he was planning to use Ethan as a bargaining chip. I overheard a phone conversation of his with another politician, offering to give the child up for adoption in exchange for support for a bill. My son would be given as a gift to a couple of business people who could finance his campaign for senator." "Son of a bitch," Jackson murmured, his fists clenched. "Excuse the language, but I can't control myself when I think about this." "That's when I knew I had to flee," Sarah said. "I waited for him to travel to Washington, took Ethan and left the apartment. I had no money, nowhere to go. I remembered that my mother always talked about this region, that she had worked here when she was young. I didn't know I would find you." Jackson approached her, kneeling beside the chair where she was sitting. Carefully, he touched her face with the palm of his hand, drying the tears that insisted on flowing. "You found me," he said simply, "and now you're not alone anymore." The kiss that followed was different from the others. There was no urgency or desperation, but a deep tenderness, a silent promise of protection and care. Sarah felt something break inside her, a wall that she had built over the years to protect herself from pain. Jackson was different from all the men she had known. There was a gentle strength in him, a masculinity that didn't need to dominate to assert itself. "Come," he said, standing up and extending his hand to her. "It's late, and tomorrow we'll have a lot of work." Sarah hesitated for a moment, looking at the extended hand. She knew that accepting that invitation meant much more than simply going to bed. It meant fully trusting Jackson, giving herself to him not only physically but emotionally. It meant believing that he would be different, that he wouldn't abandon her when things got difficult. "I won't disappoint you," Jackson said, as if he could read her thoughts. "Never." Sarah placed her hand in his, allowing him to help her stand up. Together they walked into the house, Ethan sleeping peacefully in her arms. It was a moment of peace before the approaching storm, a moment of intimacy that both knew might be the last for a long time. In the bedroom, while Jackson prepared an improvised crib for Ethan, Sarah observed him with a mixture of love and fear. She loved the gentleness with which he treated her son, as if he were his own. She loved the strength of his arms, the security he radiated, the way he made her feel protected. But she feared what William could do to him, the resources that the congressman had to destroy their lives. "You're afraid," Jackson observed, approaching her after accommodating the baby. "Very," Sarah admitted. "Afraid that he'll hurt you, afraid that I'll lose Ethan, afraid that all of this is just a dream and I'll wake up alone again." "It's not a dream," Jackson said, pulling her into his arms. "And you'll never wake up alone again." His hands found hers, intertwining their fingers in a silent promise. Sarah felt the warmth of his skin, the strength of his tense muscles, the masculine smell that reassured and excited her at the same time. When he kissed her, it was with a contained passion that spoke louder than any word. "I love you," he murmured against her lips. "I know it's crazy. I know we've known each other for a short time. But I love you, Sarah. I love you, and I love Ethan as if he were my own son." "I love you too," Sarah responded, the tears returning. "But I'm so afraid of losing you." "You won't lose me," Jackson promised, lifting her in his arms and carrying her to the bed. "We'll have to fight. We'll have to be strong, but you won't lose me." The love they made that night was intense and desperate, as if they wanted to engrave in each other all the sensations, all the emotions, all the promises that words couldn't express. Jackson adored her with a reverence that surprised her, exploring every inch of her body with the patience of a man who has all eternity. Sarah gave herself completely, without reservations, without fears, allowing him to know her in a way that no other man had known. When they finally fell asleep, intertwined in each other's arms, the sky was already beginning to lighten on the horizon. But peace lasted briefly. The phone rang before 6 in the morning, bringing news that would change everything again. William Harrison had used his political influence to get an arrest warrant against Jackson for kidnapping and false imprisonment. The police were on their way to the ranch. The war had officially begun. The sound of sirens cut the morning air like sharp blades, echoing across the pastures and making the cattle stir restlessly. Sarah woke with a start in Jackson's arms, her heart racing when she saw the red and blue lights approaching along the dirt road. 3 civil police patrol cars, followed by an unmarked car that she immediately recognized. William had fulfilled his threat. "Get dressed quickly," Jackson said, jumping out of bed and running to the wardrobe. "Take Ethan and go to the back room. Hank will take you across the pastures to my cousin's house on the neighboring ranch." "No," Sarah said, also standing up and holding his arm. "I won't let you face this alone. If they take me, they'll have to take you too." "Sarah, be sensible," Jackson insisted, already putting on his jeans. "If they arrest you, William automatically gets custody of Ethan. That's what he wants. We can't give him that victory." But it was too late to flee. The knocks on the front door echoed through the house like thunder, followed by the authoritative voice of the sheriff announcing that they had a warrant for arrest and search and seizure. Jackson sighed heavily, running his hands through his hair, and looked at Sarah with a mixture of anger and resignation. "Promise you'll take care of Ethan no matter what happens," he said, pulling her into a last desperate embrace. "Promise you won't let William get his hands on him." "I promise," Sarah whispered against his chest, tears already beginning to flow. "But you also promise that you'll come back to me." "I'll come back," Jackson responded, kissing her with an intensity that spoke of farewell and hope at the same time. "No matter what happens, I'll come back to you." The police entered the house with all the pomp of the law, led by Sheriff Parker, a middle-aged man with a prominent belly and the air of someone who was fulfilling an unpleasant duty. Behind him came William, trying to disguise the triumphant smile, and 2 lawyers carrying folders full of documents. "Mr. Jackson Blackwood," the sheriff said, taking the handcuffs from his belt. "You're under arrest for kidnapping, false imprisonment, and illegal appropriation of a minor. You have the right to remain silent and to have a lawyer present during interrogation." "Kidnapping?" Jackson laughed bitterly, extending his wrists to be handcuffed. "Sheriff, you're arresting a man for giving shelter to a woman and a child who fled from a situation of domestic violence. The accusations are serious, Blackwood," the sheriff responded, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "We have the testimony of the interested party alleging that Mrs. Sarah Oliveira is being kept here against her will." "That's a lie," Sarah exploded, taking a step forward with Ethan in her arms. "Sheriff, I came here of my own free will." "I was fleeing from him," she pointed to William. "He kept me prisoner in Austin. He threatened me. He wanted to sell my son." "These are accusations without proof," William intervened, pretending to be a victim. "Sheriff, this woman is mentally unstable. She abandoned the home that I offered her, took my son without authorization, and now is being manipulated by this man who just wants to take advantage of the situation." "Mentally unstable?" Sarah repeated, her voice rising an octave. "I have recordings of you, William. I have photos of the marks you left on my body when I tried to leave the house. I have messages from you threatening to take Ethan away from me if I didn't do what you wanted." A tense silence took over the room. The sheriff looked from William to Sarah, clearly perceiving that there was more to that story than the official documents told. But the orders came from above, and he had no choice but to comply with them. "Mr. Jackson, I'll have to take you in to make a statement," the sheriff said, avoiding looking directly at Sarah. "And you, ma'am, will have to come with us too. The child will be under temporary custody of the biological father until the situation is clarified." "No!" Sarah shouted, pressing Ethan against her chest. "You won't take my son from me. He's not a father. He's just a sperm donor. Ethan is mine." William took a step forward, extending his arms to take the child. "Sarah, don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. Ethan is my son, and he has the right to the care and life that only I can offer." That's when Jackson exploded. Even handcuffed, he threw himself against William with all his strength, knocking him to the floor of the living room. The police held him back before he could do more damage, but the message was delivered. "If you lay a finger on that child," Jackson growled, fighting against the arms that held him, "I swear to God I'll kill you with my bare hands." "You see, Sheriff," William said, getting up and straightening his suit. "This man is violent, dangerous. That's exactly why I need to protect Sarah and my son from him." Sarah looked around, desperate, searching for an exit. The ranch employees had gathered in the area outside the house, but they couldn't do anything against the police force. Mrs. Martha was crying in the kitchen. Hank was pacing back and forth like a caged animal, and the other ranch hands whispered among themselves, clearly outraged by the situation. It was then that a new voice cut through the tension like a blade. "What circus is this on my property?" Everyone turned to see a tall, thin man entering the room, wearing an expensive suit and carrying a leather briefcase. He was about 60 years old, with perfectly combed white hair and an air of authority that made even the sheriff stiffen his posture. "Mr. Thompson," Jackson said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" "I heard that my client was being illegally arrested," the lawyer responded, taking documents from his briefcase. "Sheriff Parker, I'm Matthew Thompson, Mr. Jackson Blackwood's lawyer. I'd like to see the arrest warrant, please." William paled slightly. Matthew Thompson was one of the most respected lawyers in the state, known for never losing a case and for not accepting bribes. If he was there, the situation had become considerably more complicated. "The warrant is in order," the sheriff said, handing the papers to Matthew. "Based on formal accusations of kidnapping and false imprisonment." Matthew examined the documents carefully, frowning at each line. "Sheriff, this warrant is a farce. There is no evidence of any crime, just the word of one man against that of a woman. And from what I see here, Mr. William Harrison doesn't even have official recognition of paternity of the child." "What do you mean?" William exploded. "Of course I'm the father. I maintained Sarah for 2 years. I paid all the medical expenses of the pregnancy. Maintaining a woman doesn't mean being the father of her child," Matthew responded coldly. "Where is the DNA test? Where is the birth certificate? According to the documents I have here, Ethan Oliveira doesn't have a registered father." Sarah felt her heart race. It was true. When Ethan was born, she had refused to put William's name on the birth certificate, foreseeing that one day he would use this against her. At the time, William had been furious, but she was inflexible. "These are technicalities," William said, clearly nervous. "I can prove paternity at any time." "Then prove it," Matthew challenged. "Until then, this child is the exclusive responsibility of the mother, and any attempt to remove him from maternal custody without a specific court order is a crime." The sheriff looked at the documents again, realizing that he had been used. William had presented only one version of the facts, omitting crucial details that completely changed the legal situation. "Congressman," the sheriff said, clearly irritated at having been deceived, "you assured me that you had all the necessary documents." "I do," William insisted, but his voice no longer sounded so confident. "They're just bureaucratic formalities. The important thing is to protect the child from a hostile environment." "Hostile environment?" Mrs. Martha intervened, entering the room with eyes red from crying so much. "This house has been receiving families for 30 years. I raised Jackson since he was small, and I know how to recognize love when I see it. This young woman and this child have never been safer anywhere." "You weren't called to give an opinion," one of William's lawyers said sharply. "No, but I'm going to give my opinion anyway," Hank said, appearing at the door with 5 other ranch hands behind him. "Boss Jackson is the most honorable man I've ever known. If he says he's protecting this family, it's because they really need protection. And if anyone here thinks they're going to take them away by force, they'll have to go through us first." The tension in the room increased dangerously. The police put their hands on their weapons, but the sheriff signaled for them to remain calm. It was clear that the situation had gotten out of control, and an armed confrontation would be a disaster for everyone involved. "Sheriff," Matthew said, taking advantage of the moment, "I suggest you return to the station and review this case more carefully. There is evidence that the real victim here is Mrs. Sarah Oliveira, not Congressman Harrison." "What evidence?" William asked, trying to maintain his composure. "The recordings that Mrs. Sarah mentioned," Matthew responded. "The photographs of the aggressions, the threatening messages, all duly registered and authenticated." Sarah looked at Matthew with surprise. She had mentioned this evidence, but in reality, she wasn't sure if it would be legally valid. The lawyer, however, spoke with a confidence that reassured her. "These are inventions," William said, but his voice trembled slightly. "A desperate attempt to invert the situation. Then you won't mind going through an authenticity verification examination," Matthew retorted. "I have experts specialized in digital forensic analysis. In 24 hours we can prove whether the files are true or not." William swallowed hard. He knew that some of the recordings were true, made by Sarah during their most heated discussions. At the time he hadn't cared, thinking that she would never have the courage to use them. Now that arrogance could cost him dearly. "Sheriff," Matthew continued, "I suggest you release my client immediately and archive these unfounded accusations. Otherwise, I will be forced to file a suit for illegal arrest and abuse of authority." The sheriff hesitated for a moment, weighing his options. He knew that Matthew Thompson didn't make empty threats, and an accusation of abuse of authority could end his career. On the other hand, William Harrison had enough political influence to cause problems as well. "All right," he said finally, signaling for them to remove Jackson's handcuffs. "But this isn't over. The case will be properly investigated, and if there is evidence of a crime, we'll be back." Jackson massaged his wrists where the handcuffs had left red marks, but his eyes remained fixed on William. "You can come back as many times as you want, Sheriff, but you won't find anything other than a family that loves and protects each other." William looked around, realizing that he had lost that battle. The expression on his face was one of pure hatred as he stared at Sarah, who remained firm with Ethan in her arms. "This isn't over, Sarah," he said, his voice low and threatening. "You know what I'm capable of. You know how far I can go." "Yes, I do," Sarah responded, surprising everyone with the firmness of her voice. "But now you also know that I'm not alone anymore." Jackson approached her, enveloping her with a protective arm. The gesture was simple, but loaded with meaning. It was a public declaration that they were together, that he wouldn't back down. "Congressman," Jackson said, looking directly into William's eyes, "you are not welcome on my property. If you return here without a court order, it will be considered home invasion." William opened his mouth to reply, but Matthew interrupted him. "I believe the gentlemen have said everything they had to say," the lawyer observed. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a family to represent." After the cars departed, leaving only the red dust and the feeling that the storm had just begun, Sarah finally collapsed. All the accumulated tension came out in convulsive sobs while Jackson held her against his chest, murmuring words of comfort. "It's over," he said, stroking her hair. "For today, it's over." "It's not over," Sarah responded, her voice muffled against the fabric of his shirt. "He'll come back, Jackson. He'll use all the influence he has to destroy us. Then we'll be ready," Matthew said, approaching them. "But first, I need all the evidence you have. Recordings, photographs, documents, witnesses, everything." Sarah looked at him with renewed hope. "Mr. Thompson, thank you for coming. But how did you know we needed help?" The lawyer smiled for the first time since he had arrived. "Let's say I have friends who keep an eye on certain suspicious political activities. When I heard that William Harrison was using his influence to persecute a woman and a child, I couldn't stay idle." "We have no way to pay your fees," Jackson said, embarrassed. "Who said I want payment?" Matthew responded. "There are certain causes worth fighting for free. This is one of them." That night, For the first time since William had appeared, Jackson and Sarah could sleep in peace. But both knew it was just the eye of the hurricane. The real storm was still to come, and William Harrison was not a man to accept defeats easily. Meanwhile, many hundreds of miles away, in his office in Washington, William planned his revenge. If he couldn't have Sarah and Ethan by law, he would use other means that Jackson Blackwood hadn't yet imagined, but that he would soon discover were much more dangerous than any court order. 3 weeks passed in a deceptive peace. Jackson and Sarah had fallen into a domestic routine that made them forget, for precious moments, about the approaching storm. She helped with the ranch administration, revealing an intelligence for numbers that surprised everyone. Ethan grew strong and healthy, winning the heart of every employee with his toothless smiles. And Jackson discovered each day that loving didn't make him weak, but infinitely stronger. It was Mrs. Martha who brought the first bad news. She arrived in the kitchen of the main house with a pale face, holding a local newspaper in her trembling hands. "Mr. Jackson," she said, her voice breaking, "you need to see this." The headline displayed a photo of Jackson and Sarah embracing on the porch, taken with a telephoto lens. "Rancher harbors fugitive and child in human trafficking scheme," said the sensationalist title. The article, clearly planted by William, painted Jackson as a criminal who exploited vulnerable women, and Sarah as a high-class prostitute fleeing with stolen money. "Son of a bitch," Jackson muttered, crumpling the newspaper in his hands. "He won't be able to destroy me with lies." But lies had long legs. In the following days, IRS inspectors appeared to audit the ranch's books. The EPA arrived with environmental verification orders. The health department questioned the conditions of the corrals. It was a perfect coordination of bureaucratic harassment, clearly orchestrated by someone with a lot of influence. "It's working," Sarah said, watching through the window as another official car came up the road. "He's managing to destroy us little by little." "Not yet," Jackson responded, but his voice sounded tired. "Matthew said that all these verifications are legal, but they won't find anything irregular. The ranch has always been clean." It was then that the cruelest blow arrived. A call from Matthew in the middle of the night brought the news that would change everything. "Jackson." The lawyer's voice sounded tense over the phone. "William got a search and seizure warrant for Ethan, this time based on a DNA test. He alleges that the child is in a risk situation." "But how?" Sarah shouted, hearing the conversation. "How did he get genetic material for the test?" "I don't know," Matthew admitted. "But the document seems legitimate. The police will arrive there within a few hours." Jackson hung up the phone and looked at Sarah, who was holding Ethan against her chest as if she could protect him with her own body. Both knew that there was nowhere else to run. William had used all the resources at his disposal, and now he had the law on his side. "Let's run away," Sarah said, standing up with determination. "I'll take Ethan and we'll leave the country. I have a cousin in Canada. We can stay there until—" "No," Jackson interrupted her, holding her by the shoulders. "We're not going to spend the rest of our lives running, Sarah. That's no life for you or for Ethan." "Then what do you suggest?" she asked, tears flowing freely. "That I hand my son over to that monster?" Jackson was silent for a moment, his mind working furiously. There was a way out, but it was risky, dangerous. It could cost him everything. "There's something I haven't told you," he said finally. "About William. About what I discovered about him." Sarah looked at him with curiosity mixed with desperation. "What?" 3 years ago, one of the neighboring ranches was sold under suspicious conditions. The owner, an upright man, suddenly began to have problems with inspections, labor lawsuits, environmental accusations. Exactly what is happening to me. He ended up selling the land for a pittance. And what does that have to do with William? "The ranch was bought by a shell company," Jackson continued. "It took me 2 years to discover, but I managed to track it. The company belongs to William Harrison. He uses the scheme to appropriate valuable lands. He creates problems to force the owners to sell cheap." Sarah felt her blood freeze. "You think he did all this because of the ranch?" "I think when he discovered where you were, he saw a double opportunity," Jackson said. "To recover you and Ethan, and on top of that to get my lands. 2 birds with 1 stone." "But how does this help us now?" Jackson went to the safe hidden behind a painting on the wall and took out a thick folder. "Matthew helped me investigate. We have documents, bank records, testimonies from other ranchers who went through the same thing. William Harrison isn't just a corrupt politician, he's a criminal. Sarah looked at the papers with renewed hope, but reality hit them like a cold shower. Outside, sirens could already be heard in the distance. "There's no time," she said. "They're coming." Jackson quickly put away the documents and picked up the phone. "Hank," he said when the foreman answered, "prepare the horses. 2 of the fastest, and call all the men to the yard." "Are you going to fight?" Sarah asked, surprised. "I'm going to buy time," Jackson responded. "Enough for Matthew to present the evidence to the district attorney. William may have gotten a warrant, but if we prove that he's a criminal, any judicial decision can be annulled." The patrol cars stopped in the yard exactly like the first time, but this time William had brought reinforcements. 10 police officers, 2 court officials, a social worker, and 3 private security guards got out of the cars. He wasn't willing to accept another failure. Jackson left the house with Sarah at his side, Ethan in her arms. But this time they weren't alone. All the ranch employees positioned themselves behind them, a human wall of loyalty and determination. "Congressman," Jackson said, his voice echoing through the silent morning. "Back to disrespect my property. This time with all legal authority," William responded, showing the documents. "Verified DNA test, valid court warrant. Ethan Harrison is coming with me today." "Ethan Oliveira," Sarah corrected, raising her chin defiantly. "My son's name is Ethan Oliveira." "Not for long," William said, signaling for the police to approach. "Soon he'll have the name he deserves." That's when Matthew arrived, not alone, but accompanied by 3 men in suits that Sarah didn't recognize. The lawyer was almost running, carrying a huge folder and speaking rapidly on his cell phone. "Stop everything," he shouted before even getting out of the car. "Sheriff, this warrant is suspended." William paled. "Suspended? By whom?" "By the federal district attorney's office," one of the men in suits responded, approaching and showing his identification. "Prosecutor Anderson, Congressman William Harrison, you're under arrest for racketeering, embezzlement, active and passive corruption, and falsification of documents." The silence that followed was deafening. William looked around like a cornered animal, quickly calculating his options. His lawyers whispered furiously among themselves, trying to understand what had happened. "This is absurd," William exploded. "I'm a federal congressman. I have parliamentary immunity." "Not for common crimes," the prosecutor responded coldly. "And falsifying a DNA test to kidnap a child is a common crime, Congressman." Sarah felt her legs weaken. "Falsifying? The test he presented is false," Matthew explained, approaching them. The laboratories confirmed that they never performed such a test. William bribed a technician to create a fraudulent document. "But I am the father," William shouted, completely losing his composure. "I lived with Sarah for 2 years. Ethan is my son." "Maybe he is," the prosecutor admitted. "But that doesn't give you the right to commit crimes to prove it, especially when there is evidence that you psychologically and physically abused the child's mother." Sarah looked at Jackson with tears in her eyes, but this time they were tears of relief. He pulled her into his arms, enveloping her and Ethan in a protective embrace while they watched William being handcuffed. "How did you discover?" William asked, his voice defeated. "The recordings that Sarah made were just the beginning," Matthew explained. "When we started to investigate, we discovered a pattern. At least 8 ranchers in 3 states were victims of your scheme. Bribes to inspectors, falsified documents, intimidation. You built a criminal empire, Congressman. And the last straw was trying to use an innocent child as a blackmail tool," the prosecutor added. That caught the attention of federal authorities. While William was being taken to the patrol car, he turned one last time to Sarah. The hatred in his eyes had been replaced by something more frightening, a cold promise of revenge. "This isn't over, Sarah," he said, his voice low but clear. "Even from jail I can reach you." "You can try," Jackson responded, taking a step forward. "But now she has an entire family to protect her. And I swear to God that if you try to do any harm to her or Ethan, there will be no place in the world where you can hide." After the cars departed, taking William and finally leaving true peace, the entire ranch exploded in celebration. The ranch hands shouted. Mrs. Martha cried with joy. Hank opened a bottle of whiskey that he had been saving for years. But Jackson and Sarah moved away from the crowd, walking in silence to the creek where everything had begun between them. There they sat on the same bank where they had kissed for the first time, Ethan sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Is it really over?" Sarah asked, still not completely believing. "It's over," Jackson confirmed, putting his arm around her. "William will be in prison for a long time, and even when he gets out, he won't have the power to bother us anymore." "And us?" she asked, looking at him with eyes full of hope and fear. "What happens to us now?" Jackson turned to face her completely, taking something from his shirt pocket. It was a simple gold ring that had belonged to his mother. "What happens is that I want to spend the rest of my life loving you," he said, kneeling on the damp sand. "I want to raise Ethan as my own son. I want to have other children with you. I want to grow old by your side on this land that I love. Sarah Oliveira, will you marry me?" The tears returned, but this time they were tears of pure happiness. "Yes," she whispered, extending her trembling hand to receive the ring. "Yes, I will." The kiss that followed was different from all the others. There was no desperation or urgency, just pure love and the certainty that they had found their place in the world. Ethan woke up in her arms and, as if understanding the moment, smiled for the first time, a toothless smile that melted both their hearts. 6 months later, the small church in the neighboring town was packed for Jackson and Sarah's wedding. Mrs. Martha cried copiously in the first pew. Hank served as best man, and Ethan, now 8 months old and officially adopted by Jackson, wore a small white suit and drew sighs of admiration from the female guests. William Harrison, meanwhile, was serving time in a federal penitentiary, his assets confiscated, his political career destroyed. The investigations revealed even more crimes, involving other politicians and businessmen, resulting in an operation that became known as Operation Cleanland. Sarah never heard from him again, except through newspapers that reported new developments in the case. A year after the wedding, Sarah gave birth to a daughter, Martha, in homage to the woman who had welcomed them when they most needed it. Jackson cried when he held her for the first time, realizing that he had found not just a wife and a son, but a complete family. Ethan grew up strong and happy, calling Jackson father without knowing that he didn't carry his blood. For him, family was never about genetics, but about love, protection, and presence. When he turned 5, Jackson told him the truth about his origin, in a simple way that the child could understand. "The daddy you have now chose you," Sarah explained, sitting with him on her lap on the porch of the main house. "And that makes our love even more special." "I choose you too," Ethan responded, hugging them with the pure simplicity of children. "Forever and ever." And that's how a story that began with flight and fear was transformed into a tale of love, courage, and new beginnings. Jackson learned that loving wasn't losing control, but gaining a purpose. Sarah discovered that she deserved to be loved with intensity and respect. Ethan gained not just a father, but a family that would love him unconditionally. The ranch prospered under the joint administration of Jackson and Sarah. She revealed herself to be a born administrator, modernizing processes and increasing productivity. Together, they expanded the business, always maintaining the values of honesty and respect that guided their lives. On the warm nights of the Texas plains, when the family gathered on the porch to watch the stars, Jackson sometimes remembered that day when Sarah appeared like a mirage in the red dust. Now she was there, real and solid by his side, mother of his children, companion of his life, living proof that true love could overcome any obstacle. "What are you thinking about?" Sarah would ask, noticing his distant look. "About how life can change in a single moment," he would respond, pulling her closer. "About how a man can spend years thinking he's complete, only to discover that he was just waiting. Waiting for what? Waiting for you to arrive and show what it really means to live." And under the infinite sky of the Texas plains, surrounded by the children who slept peacefully and by the land that sustained them, Jackson and Sarah knew that they had found not just love, but their place in the world. A place where there was no room for fears or flights, only for the absolute certainty that, together, they could face any storm that life might bring. Their love had been born from chaos, grown in adversity, and strengthened in struggle. It was a mature love, tested by fire, that knew how to value each moment of peace because it knew the price of war. And it was exactly this that made it indestructible. Because true love isn't that which is born in ease, but that which chooses to remain even when everything seems lost. And Jackson and Sarah had made that choice day after day, until it became as natural as breathing. forever and ever, as Ethan had said. A simple promise, but one that contained all eternity.